So good morning, everybody. We're happy to be here this morning talking about cloud migration and how to move your data and infrastructure to the cloud. So I guess we'll introduce ourselves right now. And then my name's Don Murray, and I work a lot with Stuart on cloud infrastructure and Vision Server. And so go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, my name is Stuart Harper. I oversee the cloud group at SAFE. So I've been at SAFE for 13 years and work on FME Cloud, FME Hub, and really anything to do with cloud.
Yeah. And Jen?
Yeah, so I'm Jen, and I'm a support specialist at SAFE, but I focus on all of the support to do with cloud. So FME Cloud, or people who are moving FME server to the cloud or just want to connect to their cloud services from FME.
Yeah, so Jen's the one who does all the hard work in supporting customers. So any questions you have, this is a great place to start that conversation. So okay, here we go. Come on. Okay, yeah, so first the agenda. We've already done who we are, so that's great. We'll turn our webcams off in a minute. And so then we're going to talk about cloud benefits and opportunities, some considerations as you're moving to the cloud. And then we're going to talk about application migration and data migration. This webinar is a survey, so we're going to cover a lot of topics. And the goal is that this is the beginning of the conversation for you to reach out to us, and we can help you with all that. So yeah, so there we are. I'm going to turn off my webcam now, and just to save bandwidth for people. So there we go. And so who's SAFE? We've been around for 25 years, focusing on helping organizations maximize the value of data. And you can see there we have 10,000 organizations around the world that do that in 128 countries. So it doesn't matter where you are, we can help you. Our partners, we have really strong partners around the world that help and work with us to implement FME. They do training, consulting, and support around the world. So wherever you are, be sure that there's an FME expert, an FME partner nearby. Okay. So what do we build? We build a no-code data and application integration platform. And you can see there's three components really. There's the desktop where you build these data workflows, connecting databases, files, systems together. And then on server, you can automate those data workflows and then also connect triggers so that when something happens in one application, the data can immediately cause actions in other applications. And that's what we're really seeing a lot of growth in, is this ability to connect applications. And last but not least, and really relevant to this webinar, is our FME Cloud, which is a really, just a few mouse clicks, and now you have your own infrastructure allocated. We manage it of FME server in the cloud. And mobile, we also have some mobile apps, which FME AR and FME Data Express. And if you want to try any of this stuff, reach out to us. And so what is our strength at SAFE? It really is unrivaled data support. There's no other enterprise integration tool that supports as many different data sources or data systems as we do. And you can see web there, that's all around REST API. So if something has a REST API, we can connect to it very easily. And again, the big thing is no code. Our strength, where we really grew up, is all around spatial data support. And we're really seeing spatial data support become more important across the enterprise. And so by embracing our technology, you're able to leverage that across your organization, whereas traditionally it's been maybe in the engineering, planning, or that sort of thing. Now you can use it to support your business decision process. And these boxes here just show the growth of spatial. The solid boxes are things that are purely spatial: indoor mapping, point cloud, 3D, building information models, etc. The dashed lines is where we do also support spatial, and we're seeing spatial data in those areas grow more and more. So a lot of databases now recently have added spatial support, and we see that trend continuing as spatial data becomes more important across the enterprise. So with our technology, the value you get really is you can save time. It's a no-code approach, it's visual. And so what that means is that when a workflow is built, it's really easy for somebody who's a domain expert to look at the flow and understand it. When you compare that with code, it's very difficult for somebody who's not a coder to sit down with a programmer and understand what's going on. And in fact, we've seen these big workflows being printed on large sheets of paper and used as a way for the domain experts and the people who really understand the applications to sit down with the technical person building the workflows. Save money because we support all kinds of systems, spatial systems, applications, real time. It doesn't matter what kind of data. Now you can use one tool to handle all your data types and data challenges. Also, that saves you money because of training. You don't have to train people on multiple tools. Data quality, that's one, but we have tools within our technology. And we're going to talk about that because as we're doing these application and data migrations, there's opportunities there to make the destination improve the data as it's being moved from where it originally is now to where you want to get it, and even add more value to your decision-making process. And last but not least is with FME, because again, we have this ability to work with so many different types of data and transform the data and combine different data sources together. We make things possible. We also are platform agnostic, so it doesn't matter where your applications are running. We run natively there. So yeah, and so now quickly some benefits and opportunities of the cloud. One of them is obviously when you're moving to the cloud, you're thinking about this ability to scale your applications. As work on an application increases, you don't have to purchase new hardware. You can simply just easily migrate it. You have the flexibility to scale horizontally, vertically, optimizing costs. Now you don't, a lot of the costs that are associated with infrastructure are removed, and they're handled by the vendor. Your staff now can work on higher level value propositions, and these vendors offer the processing capabilities almost always at a much better price. In the world right now, security with all this ransomware is really front and center, and this is yet another reason to move to the cloud. There's no panacea, so simply moving to the cloud doesn't mean you're 100% bulletproof, but training your staff to work with all the security that's already built into these cloud infrastructures is huge and can really help you protect your data and your organization from attack. Backup and recovering failure over as well. Often you select a checkbox in a deployment, and the cloud infrastructure just looks at it. And when you think about all these database services, often you can check a box, and now your database is replicated across multiple regions or data centers, and so that you're more resilient than ever. And of course, all these cloud systems have an amazing management and monitoring, so you can see what is going on across your infrastructure through one unified management console. So it's great. Yeah. Some of the opportunities when you're moving to the cloud, this is one of those rare opportunities in business where you're looking at all your applications. And so now you should look at each application to decide what you want to do. Do you want to move that application just as is? Maybe it's some custom application you have and you just want to lift it and move it to the new infrastructure unchanged. Other applications, maybe they're old and you've been wanting to retire them for a while, so now that gives you the perfect opportunity for that. Are there some applications that are slow? As you're doing the move, you can analyze them, figure out where the slow, what is the bottleneck, and fix that. And then also, as you move to the cloud, are there some applications you just want to replace with software as a service, and then like Salesforce or others, and then of course you're going to be moving all your data. Great opportunity to look at how you can enhance the data quality so that you're able to even make better decisions and you've improved your system once you make it to the other side. So with that, we're going to do a poll. And the poll is, where are you in your cloud migration journey? So I think Steph's gonna, there we go. So the choices are, not currently planning to move to the cloud, testing out cloud services, starting cloud migration, or you're already fully embrace the cloud. So yeah. So there we go. So looks like a pretty even split. Okay, there we go. Some folks are fully embrace the cloud. That's awesome. Yeah, lots of folks are just interested in moving to the cloud, and others are planning. And this webinar is great for that because, of course, it's talking about giving you a lot of the things to think about. So there we go. So the poll's closed, and you can see that almost half of you are not currently planning to move to the cloud. And so this webinar is great for giving you an understanding of the things you need to think about. Some are planning to move. Others are just in the testing out phase, and some are started. So yeah, so thanks for that. And with that, I think here we go to Stuart.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, so what we'll talk about now is considerations and planning for moving to the cloud. So, we appreciate as an organization, you're going to look very different depending on the size of the organization. And we've helped organizations, a consultancy with a few apps up to huge telcos with hundreds of apps that they need to migrate. So things are going to look very different, but there's some consistency between any cloud migration. And the first thing to recognize is that, migrating to the cloud, it is more than a digital transformation. It's also, it's a mindset shift for your team as well. So, you need to think about some of the potential risks of cloud migration and be aware of them when you move to the cloud. The first one is the time and cost of cloud migration. So, you need to acknowledge here that there is a cost to cloud migration. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Depending on the scope of the migration, it could be months or it could even be years. So just acknowledge that, and you really need to get on top of your planning and map everything out before you start. The next thing you need to be aware of is your cloud security and compliance. We're going to go into this a little bit more detail because it's so critical, but the key thing to understand right from the start is, what does your data look like? Is it open source data? Is it intellectual property in there that you cannot risk anyone getting their hands on? Is there personal identifiable information? Do an audit of all of the data across all of your apps so you really understand the nuance and nature of your data. The next thing is also around on the compliance side, understand if there's any requirements for compliance for certain data, like things like FedRAMP or HIPAA or things like that, and then check that the cloud providers support that. Application interoperability is another risk. If you don't migrate everything at once, which is unlikely, or even if you do migrate everything at once, how are these applications going to interact and talk to each other if they're on-prem and in the cloud, or in different clouds, or even in the same cloud when they've been re-architected? Make sure that you're not creating silos for all of your data. Business downtime, you need to acknowledge that as well. Again, you're going to probably be moving massive amounts of data and business logic to the cloud. If you do this very quickly, there is going to be downtime. Even if you do this in waves and an iterative approach, you can still experience downtime. The final part is that mind shift part. So you need to be aware that you are going to have to do some organizational training and shift that mindset within the organization to thinking about not the cloud as an enemy, but how as an organization can you leverage the cloud and get the most out of the cloud.
So there's a few things that you can do to mitigate those risks that Stuart just talked through. So engaging the team or company early on and making sure that they are part of the journey and involved in that migration process is really important. So that's going to help with stakeholder buy-in and make the transition to the cloud so much easier if everyone is on board and feels included up front. And also by training your team, you're also helping them to be successful in the cloud, not just during, but after migration. So that's going to end up saving you time and costs, as everyone's going to be more productive when you move to the cloud. If you're worried about the legal considerations of hosting applications or your data in the cloud, do lots of research on your cloud provider's compliance, as Stuart mentioned. On their websites, they have a lot of information about this, and they will list all of the different ways that they're compliant with different standards. But you're also going to need to understand the shared responsibility model. So when you're on premise, you're 100% responsibility for all of your responsibilities on how you store and secure and process your data. So just because you're moving to the cloud doesn't mean that you can sort of forget all of that and just think that the cloud's going to do that all for you. Each provider will tell you sort of where your responsibilities lie and what they are going to do to help keep your data secure and compliant. And then for cloud vendor and choice, this may be a little bit less important, as a lot of providers have very similar services. You'll just find them named different things. So you'll need to consider where each provider has their data centers located. So you're probably going to want to choose a provider that has data centers closest to you, or at least in your country, and also that support the services that you're going to want to use. So not all regions will support all services, and then just compare between cloud platforms the services that you're going to need to use. So this graph here shows data collected in 2019 that showed the majority of respondents to the survey already are or planning to use the cloud. And as you can see, AWS and Azure are the two most popular providers, which I'd say matches what we're seeing in support. So I'd say previously we had a lot of customers coming to us for support with AWS. So they've already migrated their FME infrastructure onto AWS now, or they're using FME to interact with AWS services like S3 and SQS. But we're definitely seeing more people now moving to Azure and looking at moving FME server onto Azure, or using our transformers to connect to different Azure services. So for those that said that they're looking at moving to the cloud, maybe you're already on the cloud, which cloud vendor are you migrating to, or have you already migrated to? And you can pick multiple options if you're using multiple cloud providers. Yeah, if you're using a cloud that's not listed on there, feel free to just let us know in the chat and we'll see what everyone is using.
See some of the votes starting to come in, so that's great. I'll give it another second here. And while I do that, I'll just mention, please type in your questions as we go. We have a Q&A panel that will allow you to type in your questions to Dawn, Stuart, and Jen. We'll try to answer them on the air, but we'll also do a Q&A at the end, so get them in. And perfect, I'm going to close this down.
Okay. I would say that's probably in line with what I was expecting. I think definitely I would say AWS and Azure are the most popular ones that we see our customers using. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is the types of cloud migration. So as an organization, you might have one or two apps you want to move to the cloud. You might have web applications, you might have backend services, you might have just databases with legacy desktop apps running on top of them. You've got all of these applications. What are your options for moving those to the cloud? So you can see here we've got 5 different types we've identified. And really, you know, we haven't come up with these, just to be clear. This is, if you Google any of these, this is kind of industry standard terminology for the types of cloud migration. So we've got lift and shift, replace, retire, re-architect, and replatform. And we're going to talk about each one of these. And we're going to use FME Server as the example here, partly because many of you are probably familiar with it, but also it's quite a good representative application. It has a web layer like Tomcat. It has an application layer, which is Java, which is where all the business logic runs. It has FME engines, which are kind of scalable worker nodes. This is another pattern that many web frameworks leverage. And then it has storage, databases and file storage.
Okay, so the first one that we'll have a look at is probably the simplest concept to understand, which is lift and shift. So as the name implies, with this approach, the entire application gets moved from internal servers or virtual machines and is moved to the cloud without making any changes. So an express installation of FME Server would be probably the most appropriate for this type of migration, because all of the application components that Stuart just showed are normally all installed on one virtual machine, which makes it really easy to replicate in the cloud. And you might find that there are tools and services that will help you do this or do it for you. And we did have a customer recently just migrate their FME server using a lift and shift. So yeah, so this diagram just shows on the left an on-premise FME server. So it's nearly an express install. Most of the components are installed on that top virtual machine, but the database, which is Postgres, is actually hosted on another virtual machine. So Postgres has just been installed on that virtual machine. And then when it goes to the cloud, you can see the only thing that's changed is instead of those virtual machines running on-prem, they're now Azure virtual machines. So you've got exactly the same sort of setup in the cloud. And then some of the benefits of the lift and shift approach. It's probably the most straightforward option of all of these cloud migration strategies. Can often save you cost up front and with the time to migrate because it doesn't take as much time. The skills that you'll need to manage a virtual machine on premise and in the cloud will be very similar, so you don't need to worry about too much training for this one. It also has opportunities for improvements. So you could always start with this kind of approach and then look to some of the others to make better use of the cloud, which we'll see in the next few slides in the different migration strategies. And then some of the drawbacks, kind of the opposite of the benefit of the potential, is that it doesn't take full advantage of the cloud. So if you do this and then don't evaluate how you could improve this, there's probably ways that you're missing out. There's also no guarantee that it's going to run as well on the cloud as on your sort of on-premise infrastructure. So recently I did have someone come into support where they'd moved their FME server onto Azure and were finding that their workspaces were actually running like significantly slower in the cloud than they were on-prem, and they were confused and wanted to know why. But it turns out they had to play around with the different virtual machine types in order to sort of optimize the infrastructure for FME server, which I guess is another benefit of the cloud here. It makes it really easy to just swap around your infrastructure like that. And then a few things as well to consider with that one. You might find licensing is tied to things like MAC addresses. So when you're migrating, make sure that you're ready to relicense your applications, make sure that your networking is still working. Like in the FME server example, when you do your migration, you want to make sure that FME is still going to be able to communicate with Postgres, no problem. And definitely do a test environment first before you do this in production.
Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is sort of the next level from lift and shift. It's called Replatform. And this one, you can think of it as lift and shape. So you're going to move the application without changing its core architecture, but there will be components that you will change to optimize to make use of the cloud environment. So, you know, and this is great. Sometimes when as you move an application, it's really easy to identify things that can simply be replaced with not having to rebuild the entire architecture and get it going. So again, if you look at FME server here, here's an FME server application, our express install or install with FME server on one machine in the database, and you can see moving it over to the multi deployment on Azure Marketplace, you can see a few things. Now the server is scalable. You can scale the web layer and the server core as much as you want, and also now you can also add engines using the Azure load balancer, fire up engines, and this is all supported out of our marketplace. The other key thing to notice is that we've replaced the data storage, both the FME server file share and the system database with services on Azure. And this is one of the great easy ways to really take your migration to the next level, because now your database is not running in a virtual machine which you have to manage. You're actually leveraging the cloud platform to manage your database, and that can scale up and down easily. You can then also, engage things like replication, have the database spread across multiple data centers if you need that, and that is a very simple but a very big win. Yeah. And so talking about the cloud marketplaces, you can simply log on to the Google Cloud Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace and click a button and then launch the the platform within your own cloud infrastructure. So if you're running a virtual private cloud or Google, you can put it inside your private cloud infrastructure. Same on Azure. On AWS at the current time, you would have to install FME Server or FME applications themselves, but that will be a future thing. We'll have the AWS marketplace as well. So that's, again, making it easy for you to deploy FME within any region and on any of the big cloud vendors. Yeah. So now, if we look at the next level, this is because FME Server is supported on Kubernetes. Now the next level we're seeing in the cloud is this whole move to serverless, and so this is this move in this Replatform really taken to the next level, where now all of a sudden you've taken FME Server and you've redeployed it on a serverless infrastructure. And here there are no virtual machines to manage. You can simply scale up and scale down engines and server core components as needed to meet your loads. And so now you've removed the whole virtual machine or physical machine completely. And again, of course, leveraging the database and data storage services of the cloud just takes a whole bunch of headaches off your plate that you do not have to manage. And some of the benefits, of course, of this Replatform is less time and money than re-architecting. It's simply move and then replace some key components, so you get a really faster ROI. And of course, because you're not re-architecting, there's lower risk, as you're only looking at addressing key components of your solution, i.e. the database, data storage, communication, things like that. You're also able to then put a layer on top if you want, to leverage third-party SaaS components like Auth0. So if you wanted multi-factor authentication, now you could put that on top as well. Some of the risks, it's easy as you're doing this to let too much get into your first iteration. So at SAFE, we always say start small, get something going, and then build, iteration by iteration. Don't try to do too much at once. And by starting small, that really helps you to understand, the cloud tools as you're losing them and make good decisions. Start small, understand how everything works, and then build from there.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Don. So the next one, kind of next level up, is Rearchitect. So Rearchitect is when you start to really dig down deep and do a full Rearchitect of the application. So in this model, you really are, you're changing significant portions of your application code base to fit the cloud environment that you're migrating into. So why would you do this? Well, one of the main reasons is you want to transition the app, you want to innovate, and you want to add new features to the application. So you want to leverage all of the features that the cloud can offer to bring scalability, high levels of resilience. But sometimes as well, it just might be that your current architecture it's legacy and it's not compatible with the cloud's architecture. So you need to relook at things from that perspective. This is really, it's best suited to long-term projects. This is a big commitment. You wouldn't do this on an app that's going to be out of order in 2 or 3 years. You want to be able to take advantage of all of the work that you've done and justify that initial cost. The other thing you really need to think about is you need to be really conscious on whether you lock in with specific cloud features. We'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but just imagine you move into Azure or Amazon and you say, oh, look at all these services, they're amazing. And you start leveraging all of these native services like SQS, Lambda, maybe Azure Functions. Well, then you're really locking in on that cloud. And if you in the future wanted to port the app to another cloud, it could be difficult. So you need to balance when you migrate, maybe using cloud agnostic technology like Don just showed you around Kubernetes and Docker. But there's some trade-offs there as well. So this is a example. We don't really have an example for FME Server because we haven't done a massive re-architecture yet on FME Server. It's kind of iterative, but this is a great example from Azure. So in the top left, you see here you've got a simple app. It's a monolithic app with multiple modules. It has an API, a web app, and a relational database. So this is kind of like a traditional application stack. And what you want to do is transition this to be kind of leverage all of the tooling of the cloud. So you can see on the right, using API Gateway, everything's Dockerized, and all the modules are being broken up into microservices, which is beneficial because you can optimize the microservice. It also helps you as a team scale because you can each team can own different microservices. So the microservices then communicate via an event bus. And the other thing to note here, which is where data integration comes in, is each different microservices leveraging a different type of data storage. So on the left, you've just got your relational database, but here we've got Redis, we've got NoSQL. So it's a much more complex data model to migrate to. Benefits and drawbacks here, well, we already kind of mentioned these. When you do this, you're really going to be able to do kind of long-term cost optimization, serverless scaling when you need, which is fantastic. You also get to replace outdated code, which is a big benefit. And this modern architecture, in the example previous, you should get increased agility. It should be easier to tie security into every tier, and you should get increased stability as well. Now, in some ways, the drawbacks are almost the mirror. With long-term cost optimization, you're going to get upfront lots of costs and time consuming in terms of doing the rework. It's much higher risk. You're updating a legacy code base, you're rewriting code effectively. As a team, you're going to embrace new skills. You can't just move a new app to the cloud if your team doesn't understand the cloud. So they need to understand DevOps, automation, coding, and all of the cloud services. You may need to replace some of the software components as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And then, data migration challenge is critical here. How do you get your data into this more complex, potentially new data model?
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So now we're going to talk about, the last two, which is replace followed by retire. And again, this is important to think about as you're migrating. There may be applications which you don't want to move, and so as you move, you want to replace them, or you just want to retire them. And so it's really good to look at all your applications and just ask the question: do I want to replace or retire this application? So it's really simple in this sense. A replacement, first thing, if you're replacing an application, you need to identify what are you going to replace it with. And often, if I look at SAFE, now we're using Salesforce. Before, at one point, we were running Pivotal on-prem, but then we made the decision when we were going to move to the cloud, not to port Pivotal, but to actually move to, a software as a service and get all the benefits of software as a service from a company like Salesforce that looks after, security and management and infrastructure and things like that. And then it also removes us from storing critical information. As Jen said, though, we need to understand where their responsibility is and ours is. But often replacing an application that is cloud native or software as a service is a really good solution. Okay, and so again here, FME Server, we have The simplest approach is, our standard FME server here on the left with a server and a database is simply moving it over to a cloud deployment. And on our FME cloud, you can make it scale up, scale down, make the instances bigger. It's manual using vertical scaling, but again, a really simple way to with looking at FME server to do that. If you're looking at other applications, we're going to talk a little bit later about the data migration. When we moved from Pivotal to Salesforce, of course, we had to deal with changing data models and things like that. But again, using FME made that really really simple. So this is yet another example what we're doing right now. We were using Replicon. The first thing we did with Replicon, it's interesting, we were running Replicon on-prem. And so what we did is we first ended up moving to Replicon to their SaaS version. So they're cloud-based, same functionality, very little training for our staff, and it was a really easy move. And we're also using 7Geese, another SaaS model, but now we're moving to this new human resources system called UKG. And as we're moving to that, we're looking at, we always ask the question when we move, what can we replace, what can we retire? And so in this case, we're going to replace both of those with UKG, or retire one with UKG. So some of the benefits, of course, this can be a really simple low risk option. The key is, can you migrate the data? And with FME, that's one of the key things that we do. Wherever the data is, wherever you want to move it to, we can help you migrate the data, dealing with things like data model changes and things like that. And this one also, you gain all the advantage of the cloud. When you buy software as a service, you're not worrying about the performance. It's the vendor who's providing you with with the service that's going to worry and make sure you get the performance you need. Also, there's often lots of new features that just come out. When you're managing something on-prem, you often are scheduling in new releases when you do it, and that can be a real headache. With these software as a service, often new functionality just shows up because you, again, do not have to worry about, there's no such thing as version, just new features constantly are being rolled out. And so that's some of the drawbacks. You might be in, long-term or multi-year licensing agreements that you're going to have to terminate your existing. Sometimes you're going to end up having to not be able to terminate them. You're going to have to run them out. You're always going to lose some functionality. I say may there, but whenever we've migrated, there's always one piece of functionality when you compare two pieces of software. Even if the one you're going to is much better, there's always something that can't be there. And again, this goes back to training your users how to use the new one, and figuring out a contingency so that you can lose that functionality. Staff training, again, change management, staff training is so key. You want everybody to feel they're part of the solution and not be left behind. You really can't, stress that one enough. And of course, data migration. As you're moving from one application to another, data migration is really, really the key. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So yeah, retire, really this goes hand in hand with replace. Are you replacing it or are you retiring it? It's really 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Sometimes though, you might have an old legacy application that you wish nobody would use inside your organization, and you've been trying to retire it for a long time. Moving to the cloud gives you the perfect opportunity to just do this. So let's say, for example, we use Jira for all our Kanban. We also have Trello. We use Trello for many years now. As we're moving over, we're moving more and more into Trello. I'm into Jira and retiring Trello, even though again they won't have exactly the same functionality. So yeah. So some of the application migration summary. Moving applications can be difficult, and it really needs to be planned. Most organizations have just tens of applications that are really key. Often they're connected in really complicated ways that have evolved over time, and you're going to need to really sit down and develop a strategy for each one. Go slow in a nice controlled fashion. Build on your successes. And there's no reason why you have to have everything in the cloud on one day. Probably you can probably do it in a nice controlled fashion, and where that's possible, that's really really needed. There's always going to be surprises, and the data is the key thing that you're also going to have to make sure you migrate to support these new applications. We have had some customers who have had success with the big bang approach, but more often than not, that's not possible, and has its own risks. And again, as you're migrating, really look for the opportunity to modernize your deployments. See where you can do things. The database layer and the file storage layer is an obvious first step, but also look at modern true cloud-based deployments, Kubernetes, serverless. Where can you find SaaS components that you can just embrace and things like that. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, now we've gone through application migration. I think it's time to talk about data migration, because if you're not migrating your data, the applications aren't going to be very useful. So in this section, we'll be having a look at sort of database migration, data migration, and how you can do those. But one of the things that's going to be a consideration that applies across all of those migrations is data gravity. So this map shows the Google Cloud Platform's locations and network. So the blue lines are the existing network, and the green lines are their submarine cable investments. So if you're located in a European data center, if that's where your data is, and you're in North America, you can see how much further that data has to travel. And then the further that the data has to travel, the longer it's going to take to process. So Stuart wrote an article about this a few months back, which is probably worth reading. So when you're migrating to the cloud, you need to think about where your data will be resting, where it's going to be processing, and keep those as close together as possible.
Thanks, Jen. So now let's have a look at database migration. I'm sure every one of you out there is going to have to migrate a database if you're migrating to the cloud. So before we get into which database do I need, let's just step back a little bit and think, the first thing really is, are you going to stay with the same type of database? For example, on premises, let's say you're with a relational database, something like Oracle or SQL Server. When you move to the cloud, are you going to stay with that relational database, or might there be something that's more appropriate, a NoSQL database, a data warehouse? So that's the thing I would really start with looking at before you get into how am I going to specifically replace this database? Then once you've made that decision, it's time to start looking at the options. So the first option you have is, we're not going to kind of regurgitate the last section, but it's the lift and shift. So this will be, let's say you have a SQL Server database on premises, and you want to migrate that SQL Server database as is without changing anything to Azure. So in this situation, the first situation, you could launch a virtual machine on Azure, same Windows operating system as you have on-prem. You can install the exact version of the SQL database, and then you can leverage the database migration tools to import your data and just essentially do a bulk copy of the schema and all of the data across. So that's option one. Option two is stay with the same database. So again, say you're on SQL Server on premises. Rather than this time launching a virtual machine, you can look to use one of the platform as a service. So these are managed database services from the cloud vendors. So this would be Azure SQL Managed Instance, AWS RDS SQL Server. And these are fantastic because these take a whole bunch of work off your plate. So you don't have to worry about the operating system. Security patching's done for you. All the hardware's optimized, so the database runs really, really quick. You can do scaling relatively easy as well. So in all honesty, like if you're just looking to do a straight database swap, I would really strongly think about doing this replatform and moving to one of these managed database services rather than just a virtual machine. Again, when you're doing this kind of migration, you can likely just leverage the database migration tools, or they even have some cloud migration services as well. You can use FME if you're doing some more complex migration or you want to do some data cleanup. The third type is this replace. So we've seen lots of organizations doing this more and more, and we're using Google BigQuery and Snowflake here, but really you could be using any cloud database. And in this situation, you're probably going to potentially a different schema. If you're working with spatial data, you might have to reproject the data, massage the data, change how the data is structured. So in this situation, you really need to be looking at an ETL tool to do these more complex migrations. And also, as Don already mentioned, when you're doing this data migration, why not clean your data up as you move it across? So you can look at doing that as well. The next type of data migration, this is what we're talking about here is migrating files on a disk, basically. So imagine you have a big disk, terabytes of storage on premises, maybe on a RAID storage or something like that. It's mounted on your servers. How do you move that data to the cloud, and what do you need to think about? So the first thing you need to think about is what type of storage do you want to use? Do you want to use object or file storage? So you can do more research on this, but file storage is essentially replicating that on-premises disk. So it's essentially a service, but it's just a mounted disk against the instance. So all the files are stored hierarchically on the disk, really as you have on-prem. And then object storage is very, very interesting. This is essentially, it's unlimited storage. So an example would be Amazon S3, and you can upload data to that disk, storage, and it gives it a URL. So each piece of data becomes a URL with metadata associated with it. And what this means is it's really, really good for storing large volumes of structured data, because you can store an infinite amount, and each piece of data is identifiable by a URL, which is really, really powerful. So Jen already talked about geographic location. The key thing here is it's still really fast if your data's in Azure and your application's in AWS, as long as they're in the same region. You just don't want your data to be in North America and your application to be in Sydney. This is going to be slow. Storage costs in the cloud, they are lower than you would pay on premises, but you need to be careful here. I remember hearing a presentation at the AWS conference once, and someone had just forgot about some raster imagery. I think it was Planet, and they'd left it on the server, and it was a $40,000 a month bill. But this was hundreds of thousands of terabytes of data. So if you're working with these big data sets, just be aware as soon as you leave it on disk and forget about it, you're still paying for it. And the other interesting thing with the cloud is it's not just like on-prem where you buy a disk off a vendor and you pay for the disk. Here, costs rise based on the volume and the performance. So how fast do you want to access that data, and how much data do you want to store? They're the kind of levers that control cost. And also access frequency. Many of these services have a think about that data. Some of the data you can only access every month, then you can pay a lot less money than if you want to access it every second. An application integration, do these apps or services that you'll be connecting to have their own requirements? So that's something to think about as well. So I'm not going to go into all of these. This is an example of all of the file storage, data storage that Amazon has, but Azure, Google, IBM, they all have a similar thing. The key thing is here, look at that object storage and then look at the file system storage or the block storage and decide which you want to go with.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. So the next one, of course, is API or service migration. Often you might be using an application. You don't have direct access to the database, or the database is in a complex data model, and so you want to do the migration using the REST APIs or SOAP APIs. And again, it's safe. That's something we've done. We've recently moved to Salesforce's community. Our previous one was Answer Hub, and so both of those, the way we access them was through the REST API. So again, we would use the REST API within FME, read the data via the REST API, change the data model as the data is being moved, do some cleanup, and then write the data to the target system, again, using the REST API. And so this is, more and more we're seeing this as more of these applications present nice REST APIs that enable you to access the data, because more of these vendors are realizing that, gone are the days of these massive monolithic applications that try to do everything. The future is now more very razor focused applications. And so now the key is, how do you connect these things together so that the user experience is as if they're one integrated application. And that's done, using these REST APIs and application integration platforms like FME Server. And so it's really pretty much the same. You'd use REST API, connect to your source system or systems, read the data, combine it, transform them together, change the data model, clean it up, and then write it into the target system. And and so that's really the key thing when you're using these REST APIs. And so so why use FME for migration? Again, if you look at that original chart we had, wide system support. We support everything from column separated value files all the way up to cloud databases, to APIs, REST APIs. And as we're reading, you can read multiple systems at once, transform it, do get QA, QC, enrich data from one system with another, validate the data, and through our no-code environment, it's really easy to automate the testing and the production processes in a way that your domain experts, who may not be the ones actually who are technical building the workflows, can understand. The other thing is when you are migrating from one system to another, often the way you discover data issues is when you're reading from one system and there's unexpected data values or missing data values. And again, using FME for migration, your workflows can catch those and then notify the stakeholders when they hit the bad data. The data migration challenges can't be understated. And often there are surprises when you're reading from one system and then pushing data to another. The other thing is you might be moving a huge amount of data from one system to the other. And the beauty of FME Server with its scalable engines, as Stuart talked about earlier, is this ability to scale up engines. So then you can really, parallelize and move a huge amounts of data. We also support things like files that enable us to really parallelize the data load as well. So Okay, so why use FME for migration? Again, Stuart showed the Amazon services, but the thing about FME is we're cloud, we're platform agnostic, running on anything from Windows to Linux to Mac OS, and soon ARM. But also on the cloud, we've really worked to embrace all the major cloud services. So whether you want to use, Amazon S3, or you want to use Azure Blob Storage, in those sorts of things. So that, or Google Cloud Storage, it's all there for you. Yeah, and so here's just, a lot of these, when you're working with these software as a service, getting data in is going to be through a REST API. And these are just some of them from Salesforce, ArcGIS Online, Bentley, Google Cesium, and you can see, and there's many, many more. We just picked a few here to show.
Okay, so as well as data migration, you might need to keep your data in sync, especially if you've got different data sources. So you might find that you're replicating data for use in multiple systems, or you've got a hybrid data situation where you have some of your data that needs to be in the cloud, but it also needs to be on premise. So if you don't work hard to keep your data in sync, you're just introducing data silos. You're probably going to end up with conflicting or incorrect information. You won't know which is the right source of truth, and you're wasting effort working on your duplicated data. So if you need to keep your data up to date in real time, one, I guess, do your system support this? So if your system's probably going to need to be able to use a REST API or support triggers or webhooks to do this. If your data doesn't support that, you might want to evaluate how up to date do you need that data to be. So you're probably going to be looking at scheduling your data synchronization, and then you're going to need to think about how often you need to do that. You're probably going to want to schedule that to run outside of business hours, so that you don't have people updating or uploading data while you're doing that synchronization. So you can use FME Server for your data synchronization. So you can sort of build a workspace that will do this. If you're using APIs, you can easily have the workspace set up to move and synchronize your data. And you can also automate easily with FME Server using automations. So you can schedule your workflows to run however often that you want them to, or if you want them to run automatically and sort of keep your data in sync in real time, there's a few different ways you can do this. So we do have multiple triggers. So you can be watching for data in a folder on premise or maybe in S3. And as soon as that data arrives, you can have a workflow or a workspace run that will keep that data in sync with different locations. You can use webhooks, you can use APIs. And because FME Server supports those webhooks, if you're connecting to different other cloud services, so for example, say Google Cloud Functions allows you to set up and watch for events in Google Storage. So as soon as something happens in Google Storage, you've got new data or data's changed, you can then get that to trigger other things to happen, such as running a workspace on FME Server to keep that data in sync with other systems.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So thanks, Stuart. So yeah, so migrating to the cloud, you can see there's a lot of things that you need to think about. Stuart said it right at the beginning. The first thing is to get all your talent, your team on side, make them part of the transition, because it really is a mindset shift. And as you're moving to the cloud, you want to leverage the new services, all the services of the cloud, as you can. It is a very different environment. There are things in the cloud that you just would not have on premise, and you really want to see what you can leverage to reduce, your costs, both in terms of workload, but also improving the performance of your applications.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this talk, we went through some key strategies that are industry well known, and basically you need to decide on you need to look at all your applications and decide for each application how you're going to move it, being aware of how things are connected, and also don't forget to use this as an opportunity to improve the state of things when you arrive at the cloud, so that your applications are modernized. In many cases, you may be able to replace them, and also look to improve your data. Stuart, mentioned that it's a good time to modernize and to really look at how things are going. Jen talked about the importance of where is your data, where are your users, and find applications, use applications as close as they are to each other can make a huge improvement. And yeah, and tools like FME, of course, and its unrivaled system support are really key to a successful migration. You want to be able to move all your data, enhance the data, improve quality of data as you're moving across. And that's if you reach out to us, you'll find folks like Jen who are really key at helping you do this, as we've helped others do this. Yeah. Any final words, Stuart?
No, that's great. I think, yeah, you hit the nail on the head by just kind of, really I think planning is key here. You need to really think about and kind of audit and talk to the stakeholders before you start down this journey. There's lots of opportunity here, but there is risk, as we talked about it. So you need to be aware of that. But yeah, no, I think maybe we dive into some questions. There's a few good questions in the chat there.
Okay. How about you, Jen? Any final words before we dive into some questions?
Yeah, I just agree with what Stuart said, really. Seeing some of the bigger customers that we support are spending that time because they have so many different systems and data to migrate. So I think it is important to spend a lot of time looking at that.
Yeah. So
yeah,
some good questions. So Stuart, I'll ask you the first one. Where is Safe's cloud FME server located? Is our FME cloud instances located in Canada?
Yeah, they are. So we have data centers in Canada, Europe, North America, and Australasia as well. So you can launch that FME server as close to you as you want, hopefully. And if we're missing any regions in South America or Asia, just shout and we can add those to FME Cloud easily as well.
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. What are the disadvantages of moving to cloud services?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I can start off. I think that the disadvantages are getting it wrong potentially. Like, if you just migrate everything and don't think about it, I think one big problem is cost. If you don't understand how you can leverage the cloud in terms of scaling and serverless deployments, you could come out potentially spending more money than on premises. So there's definitely, that's a potential disadvantage there.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is a disadvantage either, but as we mentioned, when you're using a cloud service, often, the changes are just made. So I know I'm using, we use, Atlassian software, and it's constantly being updated and improved. But every once in a while, a button that used to be in one spot is moved, and so, that can be a minor thing as they constantly are changing the application. You no longer have control of when they make changes; they just happen, and so I'm not sure if that's an advantage or disadvantage, but it's kind of life when you have decided to embrace a software as a service. Yeah. Somebody asked a question about Kafka. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say, someone was asking how we can interact with or integrate with Kafka in FME. So I was just saying that inside a workspace, you can add the Kafka connector, which will connect to those Kafka streams. And then in FME Server 2021, you can use data streaming. So it makes it really easy to have that sort of workspace run constantly. So it's always available to process that data.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah. So excellent. Well, thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Jen. This has been a good high-level overview and survey of migration. There's so many topics here that themselves could have been a webinar, but to kick this off, we want to just do a high-level one, just touching on all the different areas that we all need to think about as we start to migrate to the cloud. And yeah, if people have any questions, what's the best way for them to reach us, Jen?
Yeah, so you can, I guess, ask your questions through the FME community. I think once you've signed into the FME community, you have the option to raise a support case too, if you need some, probably a little bit more in depth, or you've hit a problem. And we also have live chat available during Pacific hours, 9 till 4, with a little break for lunch. So those are probably the best ways to get in touch with us.
Perfect. Yeah. And so please do reach out to us. We view this as the beginning of the conversation with you if you're really thinking about the cloud or, that's in your mind. Based on the first poll, it was, this is really for folks who are really starting to think about it or just starting their cloud journey. And so really do reach out to us. We've helped many organizations move from on-prem to the cloud or move from one cloud tool to another cloud tool because that's also, you know, what can happen as well is, you know, like we have at Safe, we move from one SaaS system to another. So, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. So, yeah. So be sure to follow us on social as well, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, and please do engage us. If you have any questions, you want to try FME Server or FME Cloud, we have you know, complimentary ways that you can get started to evaluate and show value before you purchase. So yeah. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.